This is Eddie Muller, welcoming you back to Noir Alley, our little hideout in the movie universe where folks don't always live happily ever after. Today we're leaving the big city where most noir happens and taking a road trip in the mountains of Southern California. Our picture is High Sierra from 1941. It doesn't fit snugly into most definitions of film noir, but this movie is so significant I couldn't resist showing it. High Sierra often is referred to as a gangster picture, but I don't think that label fits either. The crooks here are closer to Wild West outlaws than racketeers. In fact, it feels so much like a Western that Warner Brothers would make it again 8 years later as an actual Western, Colorado Territory, also directed by Raoul Walsh. High Sierra is also an early example of a heist story in which mismatched miscreants try to pull off a risky caper. Now, I've been involved in enough film productions to attest, making movies is a caper. Turning out a good one requires a crew of disparate talents, all applying their special skill right on cue, which is another reason why High Sierra is a landmark. It brought together an amazing gang of artists who'd pull off a caper that'd have an immediate and a lasting impact. First, there's the mastermind, the guy who plotted the job. William Riley W.R. Burnett, on whose novel the movie is based, had an amazing string of big scores dating back to his first book, Little Caesar, which created a box office sensation when turned into a 1931 film starring Edward G. Robinson. Burnett also had a hand in writing Scarface and the sensational Beast of the City, both released in 1932. While he was essential to the rise of gangster pictures in the 30s, Burnett also wrote novels and short stories in all genres, most of them instantly turned into films. Many involved groups of outsiders trying to pull off a seemingly impossible mission, Burnett's specialty, whether it was a crime caper, a Western, or a war story. His stuff sold so well, Burnett navigated the Depression like a duke, living a high life that included a thriving side business breeding racing dogs. But that all crashed by the end of the decade when Burnett went broke. But like a true professional, he simply went to work, writing his way out of debt. Warner Brothers paid him to write a picture about John Dillinger, but after months of research, the studio pulled the plug. And while recuperating on a fishing trip in the Sierras, Burnett was followed everywhere by the lodge's mascot, a scrappy stray dog. According to the writer, the entire narrative of High Sierra suddenly came to him, start to finish. The novel was published in May 1940, and days later, Warner's paid $25,000 for the rights to what was once its own project. Hal Wallace, Warner's production chief, saw it specifically as a vehicle for Paul Muni, the studio's prestige actor. But things changed when the project was handed over to the next essential crew member on this caper, producer Mark Hellinger. Hellinger had been in Hollywood only a few years, leaving behind a career as a flashy Damon Runyon-style newspaper columnist in New York. He had an innate feel for tales of the underworld. He'd written the story that became the Roaring Twenties, and he deftly produced recent Warner hits like Brother Orchid and They Drive by Night. Hellinger, in turn, brought aboard the next essential guy in the crew. John Huston had written several popular costume dramas for the studio, but he was still mostly known as actor Walter Huston's wild and reckless son. Huston was a big fan of Burnett's books, but didn't think the movies did them justice. In a letter to Hal Wallace, Huston noted that previous Burnett adaptations followed their plot and not their spirit. Take the spirit out of Burnett's books, this strange inevitability that comes from our growing understanding of the characters and the forces that move them, and you've got nothing left but the shell of the story. Well, Paul Muni didn't like John Huston, maybe because at a cocktail party the young writer called him a pompous ass to his face. To assuage Muni, W.R. Burnett himself was hired to work on the script with Huston, leading to a lifelong friendship between the two men. Throughout all this, Hal Wallace was receiving telegrams from an actor in the Warner's stable, Humphrey Bogart, begging for the lead in High Sierra, Essentially, a romantic version of Duke Mantee, the outlaw he'd played in The Petrified Forest, his breakout role. Now, as luck would have it, Muni tore up his contract 2 weeks before High Sierra was to start filming. He was enraged that the studio had canceled his dream project, a biopic of Beethoven. So into the role of Mad Dog Roy Earle stepped perennial second banana Bogart, the actor Hellinger and Huston wanted all along. They both knew genuine outlaws, and they saw in Bogart's quiet, commanding intensity a reality that was miles away from Paul Muni's histrionics.
Give me a couple of $100 and keep this. But if I don't get my end, you ain't going to be around long.
Well, Hellinger had already made The Roaring Twenties and They Drive by Night with director Raoul Walsh, so his addition to the crew was a foregone conclusion. Crashing the Boys Club were two exceptional young actresses, 22-year-old Ida Lupino and 15-year-old Joan Leslie. And rounding out Roy's gang were Arthur Kennedy, Alan Curtis, and Cornell Wilde in his first major movie role. Shot largely on location in Lone Pine, California, with a thrilling climax on Mount Whitney, the state's tallest peak. Here is a genuine watershed in the history of Hollywood. High Sierra.